So again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Morgan Buckert is a fly fisher extraordinaire and a library board trustee. Thank you very much, Morgan, for your service. And tonight she will explain the families and species of aquatic insects who call our local waters home and how you can match the hatch. Morgan moved to Sun Valley in 2005 to intern at Silver Creek Preserve. That 3-month internship turned into a permanent stay, and we're glad of that. She has worked for almost 2 decades in the Wood River Valley in recreation and conservation. For more than a decade, she worked as a fly fishing guide and fly fisher throughout Idaho, Alaska, and the Texas coast. She has volunteered for Casting for Recovery for 12 years and serves as a board member of Idaho Rivers United. She also creates really awesome custom cowboy boots. So please join me in welcoming Morgan. Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, y'all. I am Morgan Buckert, and I'm stoked that you have joined me here this evening. I apologize. I had the respiratory virus that everybody has had, and so I'm still a little hoarse, so please tell me if I need to speak up or enunciate better. I'm a 7th generation Texan, and sometimes my words come out a little slow or Texan. There you go. So it was really hard to prepare a presentation for this group. Whenever I'm talking about fly fishing, I normally know exactly who my audience is, and so tonight will be a little bit of a choose your own adventure. Please feel free to ask questions as we're continuing along, and if all of you are expert fly fishers on Silver Creek, we will get into the nitty gritty, but if some of you are just looking forward to your first season in the Wood River Valley, we can stick to some really basic stuff. Also, afterwards, I brought a variety of flies that I use here, and you're welcome to come and take a look. I, as Kristen said, moved here in 2005 to intern at Silver Creek Preserve. I didn't know anyone who had even been to Idaho before, and moved here to fish for the summer, and it changed my life, as you might expect. I have been here for all that time, worked for a really long time in the fishing industry, worked in conservation for a while. I am currently the development and communications director for the Blaine County Recreation District, and my husband and I own Backwoods Mountain Sports, and I build custom cowboy boots, and I'm happy to talk to y'all about any of those things afterwards, but you know, in our community it's 3 houses or 3 jobs, and I'm in the 3-job category. So, but doing all of those things allows me to fish a lot more than when I was a guide, which is super awesome. I get to fish more here. I get to spend a lot of time in Alaska, and I'm from Texas, so I get to spend a lot of time on the Texas coast fishing for redfish and hopefully tarpon soon. So I think we'll just go ahead and dive in and start talking about mayflies, everybody's favorite. So mayflies are a really popular family of aquatic insects that you might find in the Wood River Valley, on Silver Creek, on the Wood, on the Lost, a little bit on the salmon, and beyond. I won't talk that much about the salmon, I guess. And so understanding the life cycle of a species is really crucial whenever you're fly fishing, especially on Silver Creek, to understand what you're seeing on the water and where the bug is in that cycle. So I think I'll use my hands if that's okay with the crew in the back. So your bugs are starting out in the water as a nymph, and they can be there for a year or 2 years depending on what family, genus, or species they are, hanging out until the weather's right, until the water temperature is correct, until the sun is correct, whether it's supposed to be sunny or cloudy, whether they're supposed to be in mud or really clean gravel, whatever that is, and whenever all of the conditions are right, it's time for them to hatch. The primary purpose of a mayfly hatching is to mate and lay eggs. And one of my favorite facts about mayflies, which always blows people away, is that they don't actually have a mouth in their adult phase. Their sole purpose is to mate and lay eggs. So you've got this nymph hanging out in the water till everything's perfect, and then it starts swimming up to the surface as things are happening, and that's when it becomes an emerger. And so an emerger is a really vulnerable stage of a bug because it's exiting its exoskeleton to molt into its adult phases. And so that makes it really easy for a fish to eat, but it's generally a really short period of time, you know, whether it's an hour or a few hours. It's a short period of time, but oftentimes you can see the fish kind of eating underneath the surface of the water, and that's when the emergence is really starting. And so as those bugs come to the surface of the water, they molt into their dun phase, and that's generally what you're going to see on the water if you see a bug above the water. And so a dun, it's kind of difficult to see in this illustration, but its wings are darker, but it's in its adult phase. Its wings are also upright, and that's a really key component to the dun phase. The dun is generally an easier part of the hatch to fish because the fly is more visible, because you've got that upright portion on your fly. But it's a fairly short-lived period of the phase. So that dun, once it's completed molting, is going to head up into the trees, in the grass, in the sedges, on the rocks. It's going to hang out and continue drying out. It's just kind of, I guess, living its teenager life, kind of morphing into its adult phase. And, you know, that can be overnight if it's a brown drake. It can be a couple of hours if it's a Baetis. Again, all of these things vary depending on what of 300 species of mayfly you're looking at. And then once it's completed its maturation, it is going to mate and lay eggs. And so when it's mating, it turns into the spinner phase, and the wings clear up, and it's going to they're going to lay their eggs on the water, and then they're going to die on the water. And so all of this is happening in 12 to 24 hours, whereas this is happening in 1 to 2 years. And so it's really short-lived, but that's what makes fishing super fun, especially on Silver Creek, is really tracking that hatch when it's happening. There can be all of these things happening at the same time. There can be different species emerging while others are dying, and it can just be a smorgasbord of bugs, which is super fun. And we'll get into specific species as we continue on. But I just kind of wanted to run through kind of the big families of aquatic insects that we're going to see here, and then we'll get into some more of the specifics later. Yes? Depending on the species, absolutely. Trichos on Silver Creek, the males are chartreuse and the females are mahogany, I would say. And when you're looking at a size 26 bug, it doesn't seem like it would make a difference, but it absolutely does. There was one morning, 15 years ago, I was fishing with my husband, and we figured out that the fish were only eating one-winged female spinners, and so we threw one-winged female spinners. And that's how serious you can get. It is not necessary, but I think that's what makes fishing here really fun. Are there any other questions I can answer before? Oh, yes, absolutely. They land on the surface and drop them, and different species do different things. Some kind of really go up and down on the surface of the water. Some kind of just land on the surface of the water and that's it. It varies a lot. But I don't know that anyone's bombing from the air, but that's a really good question. Yes. It depends on what species, and that's the hard thing whenever you're talking about this, is that it varies so much. I don't think that anyone's going to travel a long ways voluntarily, but they're generally hanging out under the rocks or around the rocks or in the silt or around the silt. And if you're on the wood, especially, it's really easy to pick up rocks and see a wide, I don't know that you could find a rock on the wood with fewer than 8 species of insects. That's caddis, which we'll get to. I'm sorry, Kristen,
That's okay.
I was asking if the nymph is maturing in a little tiny stone cocoon.
So that's a caddis, which is the next family we'll talk about. Mayflies are in a variety of exoskeletons. And so that's going to look like, I don't know, any sort of crunchy 6-legged bug that you would see on the ground. Anything else? I'll show a quick video next about the mayfly life cycle, which I feel like really clarifies how all of this works and relates to a lot of the other groups of insects we'll be talking about. Shall I? Okay. And this is an excerpt from Bugs of the Underworld, which is a DVD that, I don't know, is like probably 30 years old, and it is amazing. And I teach a lot of beginner groups of women to fly fish, and they're like, ugh, entomology, that sounds terrible. And then you show them 5 minutes of this, and everyone's like ready to jump into the river and go nuts. It's fantastic.
The mayfly is arguably the most graceful of the macroinvertebrates. With its upright wings and sailboat silhouette, it is unlikely to be confused with any other insect. Mayfly nymphs are segregated into 4 behavioral groups: the crawlers, the clingers, the burrowers, and the swimmers. The crawlers can live in moderate currents and scuttle about the substrate like exotic little crabs as they search for food. With flattened bodies and strong, sprawling limbs, clinger mayflies are adapted to dwelling in the fastest currents. All mayflies frequently molt their skin, known as an exoskeleton. The freshly molted nymphs are soft and pale. Burrowing mayfly nymphs, such as this hexagenia, probe with their tusks for suitable substrate on which to dig their homes. Giant gills are required to extract oxygen from the confined environment. Swimmer mayflies are adept at crawling about, but unlike other nymphs, they can rival small fishes with their ability to swim. Flexible body and streamlined profile make for a nearly perfect hydrodynamic form. Many of the swimmers lock their tails into a single paddle, which they use like a dolphin's flute. Though there are many exceptions to the rule, the typical mayfly nymph spends about 1 year underwater. They stay close to the protected gravel and weeds where their cryptic coloration hides them from predators such as fish. On the day that they are to molt into adult form, many mayflies develop a shiny layer of gas beneath their translucent cuticle. As the gases increase, so does the nymph's buoyancy, and many have a hard time keeping under the bottom. Finally overwhelmed by buoyancy, these nymphs are stripped from the bottom and floated into the unnatural and dangerous realm of open water. Many of these nymphs stubbornly fight the upward pull and repeatedly dive for the safety of the bottom, only to be carried upwards once again by the relentless pull of the entrained gases. Exhausted by the effort of fighting the drift, many nymphs lack the energy required to break through the rubbery surface film, and a huge percentage die in the struggle. The nymphs with the highest survival rate are those that don't waste their strength fighting the upward pool, and instead swim boldly towards the surface. These mayflies have plenty of energy and break through the film with ease. At the surface, the nymph punches through the film, its exoskeleton breaks open, and frees the adult mayfly within. This transition from a nymph to the adult is known as an emergence. Some mayfly species, such as this Isonychia, don't risk the open water dash, and instead simply crawl out into the terrestrial realm to molt.
I just love that so much, and I feel like it takes years off of learning how things work. If you're on Silver Creek in a July morning, you'll have betas crawling up your legs as they're emerging, as there are PMDs and tricos spinning. And so you've got the beginning of a cycle along with the end of a cycle happening at the same time. Which is super fun. So we'll just keep moving on to the next family, which are caddis. And I started with mayflies because mayflies are the most prolific around here, and I think the prettiest and the most to learn about. Caddis, there are fewer of here, but it's still super fun and a similar life cycle. And this gets to your question of the casing. And so especially if you're on the wood and you pick up a rock and you can see, oftentimes it'll be a square shaped rectangle or a little tube created out of rocks or straw or other bits that you might find in the river, sand. Those are caddis larvae, and there are many species of caddis, just like mayflies, and depending on what species it is, it'll build its larva casing out of a specific material. And so the bugs are secreting some sort of glue-like substance to put those things together to protect themselves. And like mayflies, they're going to be living in the water for a really long time, a year or 2 years, depending on what species they are. There's an artist, I think in Portland, who maintains an aquarium of precious gems and fills it with caddis to create their casings out of and makes jewelry out of it, and I just think it's the coolest thing ever. And he has different aquariums for different species because they like a different shape of material or a different length of material, and I just think that's super fun. But the wood is a really good place to really learn about this. And so you know, again, when all the conditions are correct, the larva is going to emerge out of its casing. Also, while you're looking at these casings on the rocks, open them up and actually look what the larva looks like. A lot of them are lime green, which you wouldn't guess, or some other bright color, or some of them are just regular bug color. But when they start coming up, they become pupa, and they have really kind of long, luxurious bits hanging off of them as they're molting into their adult phase. And so whenever you're looking at caddis pupa flies, they normally have longer and more delicate materials that they're made out of, and are really pretty, I think. And so then they're going to become in their adult phase and hang out in the trees or grass or rocks or whatever it is they like to finish their maturation phase. And then they are going to mate in the air. It's interesting that it doesn't really show a picture of them mating in the air. And caddis, most species really kind of float in clouds up and down, and so it's really easy to identify caddis generally because you'll see that motion, and they kind of move along in that cloud. And so they're mating, and they do continue to touch the water and drop their eggs, so they'll bounce up and down off the water, and then they die. There's a few caddis on Silver Creek. The fish don't like them. For the most part, you can spend a lot of time fishing caddis on Silver Creek without much success. Evenings on the wood, you can have a lot more success. And then winters on the wood, generally in late March when the midge hatch is happening, there are a couple of small species of caddis that you'll find there. Again, like I said, this is not a super populous family of insects that we see here, but it's a really important feather in your cap as you're building up your knowledge of aquatic insects, and as you're starting to travel to other rivers, because there's a lot of places like Mother's Day hatches of caddis on a bunch of rivers in Montana are super, a really big hatch that we might compare to the green drakes on the wood or brown drakes on Silver Creek. Are there any questions I can answer about caddis? And I will remember to repeat the question. Awesome. Okay, we'll keep moving on then. Stoneflies are another group of aquatic insects that, again, we don't see a whole ton of here, but I think are super cool. And if you know anything about fishing, you've heard of salmon flies, and salmon flies are a stonefly. And salmon flies are 3 inches long and big and gross and nasty and super fun. And so you will see the bulk of our stoneflies happen when the wood is closed. And so that's why we don't fish them a lot. If we have a really warm winter, we can have a squala hatch late March when we catch it before. There's probably squallas right now, I would guess, on a day like today. But we don't get to fish, so the fish get to reproduce, which is just fine with me. So the nymphs are, I don't know what I would say a traditional insect would look like. It's got the big thorax, it's got 6 legs, it's got 2 or 3 tails. It's a really noticeable big crunchy bug that you're going to see. And again, whenever you're lifting rocks on the wood, you're going to see these different stoneflies, ranging from this size to 1.5 inches probably around here. The South Fork of the Boise is the closest real salmon fly hatch, and again, those are this big. I've only freaked out about bugs twice. One of them was on the 4th of July fishing on Silver Creek, and the Baetis emergence was so massive. I was completely covered, like in my underwear, in my socks. I don't know how it happened, but it was, in my weight, under my clothes, under my waders. It was gross. And the other time was salmon flies on the South Fork of the Boise, and that was gross, and they're much bigger. Like all these other families, when the time is right, all that jazz, they're going to start coming out. And most stoneflies are crawling out. And then they are going to hang out in the trees, and they have these big, clear wings. And then they're going to mate again and lay their eggs, and that's the end of their life. And so a really easy way to think about these 3 groups of bugs, which are the most likely the bugs that you're going to see, is mayflies' wings go up and down. So they're flapping their wings this way. Caddis are flapping their wings this way, but they have kind of mottled wings like a moth might have. And stoneflies are also flapping their wings this way, but they're going to have much clearer wings, more like a cicada, I guess. Hard, kind of glassine. And so that's an easy way as you start to identify these groups of bugs. Any questions? Okay. We're getting into the overwhelming amount of bugs. And so tonight we're just talking about aquatic insects. We are not talking about all the terrestrials we have here. And so this could be a rabbit hole we went down for a year. But we're going to keep it just to aquatic insects in our neck of the woods, which makes it a little bit easier. So if I only had one fly for the big wood, it would be a zebra midge, all day, every day. Midges are definitely the most populous bug that we're going to see on the big wood. It's generally the first indicator of clean water. They live everywhere, and the fish love them. They are kind of long and skinny, and for all of you who tie flies, a zebra midge is a bead, some thread, and some wire on a hook. It's so easy to tie. When I was a guide, I would tie about 40 dozen a year and use all of them because they're awesome. So they're hanging out in the water. They become their pupa phase, and that's really whenever we're fishing those on the wood, and they're hanging out under the water somewhere, generally not on the bottom. And then they become their adult phase. And midges looks very similar to mosquitoes, but they don't have a proboscis. And so they're great. Nobody's going to bite you. It's going to make for a nice day. They hatch most days of the year. The fish love them. They're delicious. Everybody loves midges. Another group of aquatic insects are damselflies, and these are really populous on Silver Creek in the summer, and the males are blue and the females are brown, and I would say that the fish prefer the females, which is the opposite of what most fly fishers are going to do. They're going to buy the blue damselfly instead of the brown damselfly. But you know, anyone who's been to Silver Creek has seen this mating situation and then this egg laying situation, and they're everywhere. And it's a super big piece of protein. It's the biggest piece of aquatic insect protein that a fish is going to see, and so why wouldn't they eat it? So now we can kind of get into the down and dirty, and I'm happy to talk about any of these as extensively as you'd like. I put together a little more information about Baetis, because Baetis are a really easy family or genus of bugs that you're going to see on almost any trout water anywhere. So on Silver Creek, most people know about the brown drake hatch, which are really big bugs. They're size 8 or 6. They are extremely populous during a short period of time. They bring people from all over the world to try to catch them. They're on the lower portions of Silver Creek and are just a blast. My first date with my husband was for brown drakes, and so it worked out for him. Damselflies, like we just talked about, are kind of all summer, especially when you're fishing in the afternoon when things are calming down or before it's hopper season. Damselflies are a really great thing to do in the afternoon. Baetis, as I said, are everybody's favorite. It's easy to see. They're generally greenish, grayish. They vary in size depending on what species they are, from about a 16 down to a 28. There's a pseudocleon, which is a species that you see on Silver Creek during trico season. I have a friend who ties down to a size 32, which I refuse to do, but he's been fishing for 50 years, and I think it's, the challenge he wants. So good for him. But they're really great. They're easy to see on the water, easy to see your fly on the water, I should say, and really prolific, which makes it really nice. PMDs, which is a pale morning dun, are generally yellowish, kind of creamish, and ranging from a size 14 to 18. Those are kind of peak summer. You're going to see those from opening day, Memorial Day weekend, kind of till mid-August when things start to cool down a little bit. Calabatus are a lot darker. They're kind of a mottled gray, and they have mottled wings as well, and they are, generally a 14 or a 16. You might see a 12 or an 18 occasionally, but generally a 14 or a 16. And those are, again, peak summer. Whenever I worked at Silver Creek, I'd be taking a shower at 7:15 in the morning, and the first calabatus would land on my windowsill at 7:17 or whatever, and you could really time it. And that's a really important part of Silver Creek is, and what makes Silver Creek easy, I think, is that these things happen at really specific times every day consistently for a long period of time. So that makes it really nice to be able to plan your day and to be able to get better. If you just keep tracking, collecting that information and really processing that information and making notes of trends, it makes it really easy. I, would pick up a client at 5:57 to be on the water at 7:08 to be rigged for 7:37 to get the beginning of the Betis emergence. And that's why I love Silver Creek, is it's so much easier than anywhere else because it's going to happen on a schedule. Tricos are amazing. Everybody loves a trico, and that's what I was saying. The male and female tricos are definitely different colors. Tricos are really small. A lot of people don't like tricos because they're small. You can catch a really massive fish on a trico. I think they taste better. You're generally fishing between a size 20 and a 26 for a trico. But while the tricos are happening in the morning on the creek, you're also going to see that Betis emergence as well as the PMD spinner fall. And so there's a smorgasbord available to the fish. And so they really appreciate having all of those options. And I'll often fish with, a Betis and then a trico trailing behind it or something to offer them options. But then you're fishing, 7 or 8X tippet, which then comes with its own variety of problems to overcome, I guess you could say. Flavs, there's a few flavs on Silver Creek. I love to talk about flavs because on Silver Creek, supposedly someone who was a guide on the Henry's Fork started bringing over flav nymphs like 20 or 30 years ago, and consistently did that over years and has kind of established a flav season on Silver Creek, which I think is super cool because our conditions are so similar to the Henry's Fork. We're able to have that, which is super interesting. And the flavs are kind of, they're similar to a green drake. They're smaller, generally like a 14, 16, maybe into the 18 category sometimes. And they are a little bit more gray than a green drake. And then my very favorite bugs on Silver Creek are mahogany duns. Everything about mahogany duns are what makes Idaho amazing. It's fall, the trees are turning, the elk are bugling, the sandhills are kettling, and there's beautiful bugs in the air. And mahogany duns are kind of a really rusty mahogany color, and they're 16 or 18, and it's just, there's nothing better than a mahogany hatch because of everything that's happening. And again, that's one of those bugs that's tastier than the others, and the fish love them. Can I answer any questions after just dumping an insane amount of information on y'all.
Seems to be with over the years, some of those genus whatever, tricos especially, have gotten smaller.
I think it depends on where you're fishing. I think that we've all seen the silt load on Silver Creek change, and I think it depends on where you're fishing and what insect you're fishing.
I was saying that tricos at Kilpatrick Bridge in the early 70s were almost an 18.
Mm-hmm.
And now anything that's above a 22 is probably too big.
I would also say that that's probably fishing pressure too, among other things that you're seeing.
That would change the size of the bugs.
Change the size of the bug that the fish might eat.
Yeah.
Because I think that if you're not using 8X tippet and you're not using at least a 22, it's going to be really hard to catch a trico because the fish are smart enough to know not to do that. But that's my personal opinion and not by no means based on any science.
I noticed the same thing with calabatus.
Mm-hmm.
More 18s and 16s.
Yeah. Well, and I think calabatus have changed the most on Silver Creek since I've been here, and have been most impacted by the sediment load. Because I know like Loving Creek used to have the most insane calabatus hatch ever, and as Loving Creek has filled up, it's really suffocated the calabatus. Yeah. Good observations. Anyone else? So I'll kind of walk you through a couple of pages of the best book ever, which the Haley Library does not have, so I'm going to buy one so the Haley Library can have it. The Hatch Guide for Western Streams. And so we've just been talking about the actual bugs, but the hardest part about matching the hatch is making the connection between the bug you're seeing on the water and what you're pulling out of your box. And so I just pulled up the phases of what they're calling a blue-wing olive, which is kind of the old-timey word for a baetis. And again, there are many species of baetis that you're going to see. And so the color and the size can change depending on the time of the year and where you're fishing. And so this book is just so fantastic because it shows a literal picture of the baetis nymph, and then it shows a couple of examples of flies you could use, and gives you some really good information in there. Sizes, colors, types of things you're trying to match, and it's just fantastic. I have never recommended any book more than this one. And this book is, I think, 300 pages, 200 pages. And so it goes into all sorts of things. And so all sorts of things I've never seen and may never see, but it's just such good information as you're trying to get over this learning curve of seeing what's happening. So then we go into the done phase. And so again, you can see these wings are a little bit darker and they're upright. And so you can see that in these flies. And so whenever you're buying flies or tying flies, what you're trying to do is get the correct silhouette. And if you're trying to match the hatch, you are trying to get the right color. We'll talk about attractor flies for just a tiny bit a little bit later. But you can see this by no means looks like this, but if you're a fish in the water looking up, it's got the attributes of the right thing. You're just looking at it from a half a mile away, and so you can kind of see what's happening and possibly be induced into eating it. So then we have the spinner phase, and so you can see those wings are translucent now. And especially after they're done laying their eggs, those wings are going to flatten out as they die on the water. And so you can see this is, I don't really like those other options, but this is the easiest group to match because you're going to literally see a bug that looks like that falling on the water. And so that makes it really easy. And then you get into what you want your flies tied out of, what you can see on the water, how you can choose the right size, or what you can make float, or what you don't want to float or half float. This is, a lifelong pursuit, which is why I think all of us are here. There's always something to learn. Before we move on to Bigwood, any other questions? Yes. Here,
Yeah, I have kind of, it's a Silver Creek, I guess, specific question. When you see a fish rise and you're getting ready to cast to it, do you take an upstream or downstream approach?
There are all of the options. You don't want to line the fish, whatever you're doing. And so whenever I was a guide, I mostly fished across so that the fly was going over the fish rather than the line going over the fish. It's better if you are fishing down to a fish just because they're not going to see your line. But if there's a fish above me that I want to catch, I am going to cast above it, but not get that line above it.
Okay, cool, thank you.
I think the key to fishing Silver Creek successfully is having a leader twice as long as you think you need. And all of this, and generally, I rarely fish less than 7X and fish 8X during peak trico season. Also, all of this is based on getting a dead drift, a truly dead drift. And there are so many microcurrents in Silver Creek that can destroy your cast so easily. I think that's really the most important part. And I lived on the preserve, and I would cut the hooks off of flies, and generally any fly that you throw into the water, the fish is going to eat. And so it's really all your drag on your fly that's preventing you from catching that fish. Sorry, that's really disheartening information, but accurate. Anyone else? Awesome. Well, we'll head on to the Bigwood, which we won't be fishing for quite some time. So midges year-round, as I said earlier, there are midges almost every day. Midges are fantastic. I probably, if I could only have one fly for the rest of my life for trout, it would be a zebra midge. They're easy to tie. Fish love them all day, every day. I have probably fished the wood less than 10 times without a zebra midge somewhere on my rig. I normally fish, a 14, 16, or 18. I use tungsten. I think that brass is too light. And I have every color under the rainbow and love to try new color combinations. And, a fish might like a hot pink and lime wire zebra midge one day and black with silver wire classic the next. And I think it's a really easy way to experiment. And is definitely a highlight of winter fishing. If you're fishing, between Valentine's Day and the end of March, midges are where it's at, which is really fun. There's also Baetis year-round, and again, we have those different species, and so the sizes are going to vary quite a bit, but you're going to see Baetis on a lot of dark days on the wood, which are fun. Flavs and green drakes often overlap and are fairly closely related. Green drakes are often a 12 or a 14, really big, juicy. Fish love them. It's a big chunk protein, so it's really enjoyable. Flavs are a little bit smaller, 14 or 16, a little bit lighter in color. Kind of hard to see on the wood. And I would guess this year we are going to completely miss green drake season because of water flow, which is fine. Happy to have the water. There are trichos in July and August. It's kind of difficult to fish trichos whenever they happen, but on a low water year in a calm pocket, it can be really fun to have a tricho day on the wood. Again, it's seeing those bugs. That's the hardest part about fishing a tricho hatch on the wood. Again, I think it's just because I love fall. Hecuba in September are amazing. It generally starts kind of Labor Day. They're bigger bugs, 12 or 14. They're, I'm trying to think of how to describe that color. A light rusty with a greenish tint. They're kind of a color that's hard to describe, but really beautiful bugs during a really beautiful time of the year. And that's generally when the mornings are starting to get pretty cold, and so it's nice because you don't have to go out until a little bit later, and then it's beautiful and sunny, and the leaves are turning, and the animals are out, and it's just awesome. In the summer, we've got those caddis when you don't have to go out to the water until 7:30 or 8 in the evening after you've been to the bar or the restaurant or whatever, and go fish before you go home. And they're just really fun, and it's a great way to spend a summer evening. And then winter stoneflies, we have Capnia and Nemora in March, which are really small, and if you're midge fishing, if you're looking in the snow, you can see them, and so they're going to be bigger than the midges, but still really, really small, like 18s or 20s, but they are bigger than the midges, and so the fish sometimes prefer them over midges. And then squala, which we generally miss unless we're having a really warm winter. They're, like I said earlier, they're probably happening right now, and we're missing them, and that's okay. So these are some of the many aquatic insects we're seeing on the wood. Can I answer any questions? On the wood, I am like 99% of the time have a zebra midge on underneath. In the winter, I will often put on a girdle bug and a zebra midge underneath if I'm gonna match something in the water. A girdle bug is a stonefly, is a squala nymph. A girdle bug, most people call them rubber legs, just a little bit of chenille and rubber legs on, like size 8, pretty big. And you can wrap them with tungsten too to get them down there.
Do you feel like this accurately describes the hatches that are also found below Magic?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. He asked if I thought that this accurately described the hatches below Magic, and I don't. And I'm trying to think if I've ever I guess I've maybe fished some Baetis below Magic, but if I'm below Magic, I'm normally throwing a streamer. If I'm dealing with the snakes, I am there to catch a big fish. So I'm normally fishing a streamer down there. And again, this is the aquatic insects we're seeing on the river. We haven't talked about streamers or hoppers or ants or any attractor flies that we might be using, because if I'm fishing on the wood, let me see what this next, oh, there we go, attractor flies. I am often not matching the hatch on the wood, but you're getting the shape of what you're seeing on the wood. And so with attractor flies, you are getting the shape right, you're getting the size right, and then it's nuts from there. And so a parawolf is one of my favorite flies on the wood. I am most often fishing this with a size 16 zebra midge underneath. And this is kind of hard to see in this light, but it's got a gray dubbed body with a tiny bit of flash, a little bit of a tail, and then it's got a split wing. Unlike a parachute would just have one post sticking up, and a parawolf has that split wing, and I think it's a little bit more effective than just a straight parachute. And so this could be a lot of things. This could be a flav, this could be a green drake, this could be a hecuba, this could be anything that you're seeing on the water, because it's generally the idea of something, but with a little bit of flash on there, you're gonna possibly get their attention a little bit better. Purple is a really popular color around here. A purple haze is a classic fly that has been super important to fishing on the wood for 15 years, if not 20 years. And fish see in UV, which is a different spectrum than we see. And though you're not gonna see a purple bug on the water, the purple really gets their attention. Purple, chartreuse, even white, anything that's going to reflect UV light is gonna get fish's attention. Another reason a purple haze works really well is it's not dubbed with a fiber. It is wrapped with a rubber leg type material, and because of that, it sinks a tiny bit into the surface. And for some reason, I think, I don't know if the fish see it better or if it's just a little bit closer to an emerger, but it does make a difference. I just put up a couple of random attractor flies. And again, you know, the world is your oyster. And this is where experimentation is really fun if you're a fly tyer, to be able to try anything. A stimulator could be a caddis or a stonefly. They come in every color under the sun. They come in every size under the sun. It's easy to see. This one has this is a really classic one with a kind of orange body underneath and some elk hair on top, and it's just really easy to fish with. If I'm fishing in Copper Basin, I'm often throwing one of those on because it can kind of be anything. You can go wild. I have purple ones with hot pink flash. And that's, you can just go nuts. And you can look through some of my boxes afterwards if you'd like and see some of that. And then moving on to a nymph, so a fly that we're going to be fishing underneath the water. I just put up a prince nymph is the most classic, I think, attractor nymph. And so it doesn't really look like anything, but if you think about that video, you know, it kind of has a structured body, it has a tail, this could be some legs if you want, and then you've got that bead head to go down there. And these come in every color and size under the sun. And I mean, truly, you can do whatever you want. And again, it comes back to having a dead drift is issue number one and the easiest way to success. Let's see what we had on here next. So we'll just back up. So yes. No dumb questions. That is a great question. What is a dead drift? So a dead drift is when your fly is floating naturally with the current. And this is, I would say, easier on the wood than on Silver Creek because the current is going to be a little more contained and consistent, and so your fly is floating down with the water. And so as it floats down, we're going to pick it up and cast again and let it float down. On Silver Creek, the water's a lot slower, and you've got a lot of things happening underneath the water, and a lot of eddies and microcurrents and stuff, and that's where a dead drift becomes a lot more difficult to be successful at, but is a really great thing to practice on and learn over years. When I am 90, I will wish that I had a better dead drift.
So these currents are pulling on the lead.
Yes.
They're re-aiming the head of this.
They're moving it around. Yes. They're much smarter than we think. Those pea-sized brains are as good as ours a lot of times. Yeah. What else? This is a lot of overwhelming information, I know. So I think we'll just move on to some resources. Again, Hatch Guide for Western Streams. This is the single best fishing book that I think exists in the world if you are fishing for trout. It just, the learning curve of entomology is so difficult to make the connection to your fly box. And so this really helps. I wish I had got this. I wish I had purchased this book whenever I moved to the Valley, and it would have saved a lot of years in my learning process, I think. If you would like to get serious, this is the Aquatic Entomology textbook, and I think it's from the 70s maybe, but it's still in print. It's still the standard, and it obviously will go deeper than any average person might like to go, but has a lot of juicy information in here and can be really handy. Other research, go to the local fly shop. That's what all these young kids are for, is to learn all of these things and enthusiastically share that information from you. We'll be seeing a fresh crop showing up any day now, and they're here to help you. And spend a lot of time looking in the fly boxes and seeing the different colors of things and thinking about the types of materials that you like, and the types of things you use to fish more successfully. Like I carry 4 types of floatant. I'm using a powder floatant for CDC flies. I'm using a gel floatant for big attractor flies. I'm using what's basically lighter fluid to pre-treat flies at home, and then I'm using powder substance to refresh my flies. And so think about those sorts of things. Think about the tippet you're using, the size of the tippet you're using, the length of your dropper fly. You know, as I said, this is truly a lifelong process that can, you know, completely control your life, as it has mine for a long time. And just use your eyes. Go out there and observe. Right now, before the wood gets really big, or while Silver Creek's closed, go for a paddle and see what's happening. There's plenty of bugs hatching right now, and see what different types of structures are in the water, and where there's gravel and where there's silt, and what, you know, where there's sedges versus reeds. And all of those different things. It just really makes it all a lot easier to kind of collect all of this information. And I think that's it, unless I want more questions. Yes, sir.
How do you fish the weed beds in Silver Creek?
I don't know. I mean, oh, sorry. Thank you, Kristen. You will have to remind me every time. How do you fish the weed beds in Silver Creek? I think a really important key of fishing the weeds in Silver Creek is to enter the creek in a way that doesn't interrupt the weed beds to create a big cloud of silt and or veg. I think that's the first step to successfully doing it. I think being thoughtful about the way you cast, because a lot of times whenever you're fishing late in the summer when the weeds are touching the surface of the water, thinking about where your line's actually going to land so that you can get as long of a drift as possible beyond the weed bed. I think that's super key. And I think exploring Silver Creek is a really good option. We've, of course, had such low water the last 3 years there. It's going to be such a different experience this year, which will be more like a historic experience on Silver Creek. But there's a lot of places where the weeds vary, and the weeds vary depending on the year. And so do some exploration. And right now is the time to do that. Take your canoe down and go scope things out before things start growing. But I do think the way you enter the creek and thinking about that cast beyond where your line is actually moving in the water is the best way to think about that. Yes, sir?
How long does the egg cycle run rate
Thank you. How long is the egg cycle for brown drakes on Silver Creek? So I think you're maybe talking about the cycle between the emergence and the spinner fall. How long they're in the water is a year, a full year. And so it's generally, 1st of June. I think it'll be later this year. The water temperature has to be pretty warm. We have to see some 80-degree days for the emergence to start. And I think that's going to be pretty late this year. So June-ish.
Morgan, I have a question. So this may be depending on how much we heat up, this may be a pretty epic flood year. I've lived along the river in 2017 and various other times, and have heard the rocks bashing against each other. What is the impact of a really high flow like this on those?
I think it takes 3 years. Oh, repeat the question. Oh, sorry. So Kristen asked how long it takes to recover from a flood year, and I think it takes 3 years to get back to normal. But of course, this year we're going to see massive changes in where there is water, where we're going to fish, where there is silt. After the fire in 07, I think. Was there a fire in 07? Whatever year that was. There were really big sediment loads that came into the water, and it took almost until 13 to move those sediment loads out. But the insects will be, I don't want to say negatively impacted because it's a natural happening, but they will be impacted for 2 to 3 years. And I feel like after a flood year, it takes 2 to 3 years to really figure out how everything has changed. But maybe that's just my personal opinion, because I still miss old zinc spur. And maybe we'll get it back this year. Who knows? But yeah, that's a great question. Yes, sir. Glad you're here, Kristen. So his question was, is high sediment load good or low sediment load good? Low sediment load is best. There are a couple of species that require a sediment load. I would rather live without those species of bugs to have a low sediment load. That is going to reduce the water temperature and make more habitat for insects and fish and vegetation and everything, really. So yeah, the flood on the wood is going to be fantastic because it is going to move a boatload of sediment out of our community, which is awesome.
You mentioned the hatch on the South Fork for the salmon flies.
Mm-hmm.
When's that?
So he asked when the salmon fly hatch was on the South Fork of the Boise, and that is generally in June. I think so it's a tailwater fishery, so the water flow is determined by the dam, and I would guess that we're going to miss that this year, but I don't know. I haven't kept really close eye on what the South Fork has been running at, but they have as much water as we do, so I would guess that's not happening this year, but June.
And they're closed until Memorial Day as well?
I think so, if anybody knows different. South Fork of the Boise is closed till Memorial Day. I think that's true. I don't go there super often. It's fished better out of a boat, and if I am going to travel that far to fish, I am going to go to the lower Lost over the South Fork. There are fewer people on the lower Lost, and no Boise crowd, which I prefer. I guess everybody here prefers.
But one of your two most epic days was on the South Fork of the Boise.
2 bug freakouts.
Okay, all right, there we go.
That is a very different answer than most epic days. Yes. Yeah, you know, my best days, well, I don't know. I've had amazing days on the Wood. I've had amazing days on Silver Creek and the Lower Lost in the fall or winter can just totally boost your ego and be a really spectacular day. A 100-fish day on the Lower Lost will make anyone's life better. Yes, sir.
Speak to your rigging difference between Silver Creek and Big Wood when you match. Is there a difference in like maybe how far your dropper is versus another and why?
That is a fantastic question. I would love to repeat that question. So he asked how I might rig differently on the Big Wood versus Silver Creek. And so on the Big Wood, I am, the Big Wood's easy because it's generally the same thing happening most of the time. And so most of the time, I'm gonna use a 9-foot 5X leader. I might throw on some 6X, especially if it's high season. And that's mostly because of the human traffic. If you can make your rig a little less obvious, I think you're more successful. So 9-foot 5X or 6X to your fly, and then I'm generally running a fairly big dropper, almost always 6X, and you know, between 2 and 4 feet down, I would say, to get to those bugs. In the winter, 9-foot 5X, and I generally have some sort of big nymph on top and then running another long dropper down to a zebra midge and then a strike indicator pretty high up. You want to get really low in the winter. And you want your nymph to be really low in the summer. On Silver Creek, at a minimum, I would say it's a 12-foot 7X leader, and I generally just start out, I buy 9-foot 5X in bulk, and so I'd start with one of those, build it down to 7X or 8X if it's tricos, and then I generally, if I'm running a dropper on Silver Creek, which I don't always do, I would say half the time I run a dropper on Silver Creek, and I'm running a really short dropper, like a foot. And so you're really just getting almost in the surface film or immediately under the surface film. And then you kind of get that, even though you might be throwing a nymph, it acts more like an emerger. And I think that since the fish are looking up, because you're fishing a hatch, it makes it easier to get their attention. Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll stop here. You'll be around for a little while.
Yep,
and
I'll be
talk
here.
a little bit about the flies. We'll turn the lights up so you can come. Just in case you didn't absorb everything that was said tonight, you can always listen to it again on our YouTube channel. So that's a great resource, especially for something as comprehensive as this talk. So let's please thank Morgan Buckert so much for a great talk.
Thank you.